No, I've got Sam.
I've got Sam.
Right, everyone, we'll call the meeting to order. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai, ki tēnei hui. Good to see everyone back around the table again. We will open a reasonably light agenda today, so we should be able to get through things reasonably well. And I'll call for any apologies. It doesn't appear as though there are any. All present. Conflicts of interest. None that have been raised, Chief Executive. Matters under investigation on the table. There's none currently. There's some coming up. Minutes of the meeting of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee held on the 1st of July 2020. Bob. Moved, Bob. We'll second to Sam. Any discussion around those? No alterations required? All in favour? Against? Carried. Moves on to my verbal report. As I said in the opening, it's a relatively business as usual agenda today. As Chief Executive just said to me, it's not unusual for that to happen at this time of year. What I'm proposing going forward is a catch up of this subcommittee, sometime to do a workshop looking at our future work streams. And now that people have got their feet under the table, and Annalisa is our independent members, this is the second meeting, and certainly with meetings with our staff, getting an understanding of how we operate, and perhaps suggesting some changes to our reporting structures. So the intention is that we're meeting of the subcommittee, including the Mayor and the Chief Executive, and we'll run through a few items at that. We've had a very informative drive around of iZone this morning. Thanks to Douglas for hosting that. It was good for those who are new around the table to get an understanding of what the history of that was and what the benefits of it, both financial and non-financial, for council, but also for the district as a whole, and what a worthy project that was. We've also last week attended, most of us attended a workshop on Three Waters and the changes proposed there. And with that in mind, I might throw quickly to Sam. Any comment you want to make on that, Tim?
So following those meetings, we've been waiting for an announcement from the government on the funding that was going to be allocated to each TA, and there was a calculation that they've run through, and Selwyn will receive 5.33 million direct. Canterbury receives 100 million total, and there's 50 million being allocated to each council, of which we get our 5.33. It's the second largest amount of any space in Canterbury, so Christchurch gets 20 million, and the next one after us is Waimakere, who gets about 4, but there's 50 million of unallocated money for Canterbury, so there'll be a bit of a discussion among the mayors and CEs about how we would share that around Canterbury. I think the most sensible thing is going to be just to follow what the government has already allocated and put it out on that same basis. There may be a different view from others around the table here, or from others at other councils, but if there are different views, then I'll bring them back to the group and we'll find out how it gets sent. But I just think the easy option is going to be, rather than run through a contended process where we have to come up with our own equations, let's just use what the government's already decided and have another 5.33, which will lift our total to 10.6. The money has to be spent on things that we don't currently have funded within the current financial year. So it can be about bringing projects forward from future years. It could be about investigating the status of where our pipes and network is at. It could be used to look at different models for working with our neighbours and across the region. So there's a bit of scope with how the money can be used, but it's brand new money and can't just subsidise existing projects in the current year. It must be spent in this financial year though. So there's a bit of pressure on us and our staff and on our neighbouring staff to make sure that we can identify that and get it spent. It's available to us if we sign the MOU. We have to make that decision by the end of August, end of this month, and we'll do that at the next council meeting. And I think one thing just to be conscious of too is we don't want to inadvertently put up the price of contracting for any of the things we might want to see this money spent on by us tendering separately than Waimakere and separately than Ashburton. We all go to market at the same time. and if the capacity is not there in the market to deliver, then we might see price increases. So we want to be sensible and actually talk to our neighbours about maybe joint procurement around how we go about spending these dollars. But thanks, Mike.
Yeah, cheers, Sam. So what's the intention to make those decisions? We'll workshop that as a council. Yeah, we'll work done this afternoon. Yeah,
through you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me, we're scheduled to discuss that in our workshop this afternoon. It's an agenda item.
Yeah, understand that. I just thought the information's only just come out, so we're on a fairly short leash. Final discussion of my report is we've got a presentation this afternoon, PX, from the CE of SICON. So that's our usual scheduled quarterly, David, update from SICON. I'll move the adoption of that verbal report. Seconded, Councillor Hassan. All in favour? Against, carried. Move through Chief Executive's monthly managers report. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Going to skip over the first two items unless anybody has questions, but I thought it was prudent to include those in my report for the information of the committee so that you can see what our independent auditor is focusing on, both in terms of conflict of interest and also the reporting timeframe extension proposals, which will impact more on our annual reporting rather than on our LTP. I'm going to talk about the LTP shortly, but conflict of interest review has been overdue for quite some time. Just request that everybody does have a good read and an understanding of the implications and know where those guidelines are. And you've heard me say on countless occasions, the rules are one thing, but perception is the real is where the real decisions are made and the views are taken from people. So just be familiar with those. Flicking over the page, Mr. Chair, on page 18, item number 3, noting for members that the Orion AGM is scheduled for August 31. And if there are any issues that committee members or any elected member for that matter would like raised at or by our spokesperson at that meeting, it would be prudent to raise those, if not today, then certainly in the next week or so ahead, particularly around future dividend streams. Where is it that they are likely to track? Obviously, Orion's involved in a fairly significant court case at the moment as well. We're also engaging with Orion on the Three Waters proposal from central government, because although that's not the prime discussion on that subject at the moment, of course the scene was set by the electricity industry many years ago where they amalgamated, and I think we've got a lot of lessons that we can learn from them, particularly in terms of establishment of new entities and governance models. So just interested to know, Mr. Chair, if there are any issues that committee members have that they would like you to raise on our behalf at the AGM. There being none, move on to the next item, which is the LTP. And on page 72, whilst in the printed agenda, it's a bit hard to read on your electronic one, we've taken the liberty of putting the work program there so that you can see what we're up to. And Greg Bell, of course, is leading through the project. I spent some time talking to Audit New Zealand early this week around their ability to be able to audit our long-term plans in a timely manner and to be able to sign off given the unknowns with Three Waters. And we just remind ourselves that Three Waters assets will in 3 years' time be removed from our balance sheet. And that's a significant chunk. It's about, for most councils, it's around a third of our infrastructural assets. It's about a third of our revenue. And we also, with that, not only do we lose those and have a quite significant impact on our financial statements, but of course we also lose an asset base to recover our fixed overheads against. So everyone's automatically looking at a rating increase in 3 years' time. I've also posed to Audit New Zealand questions around development contributions. So we have a number of developers all around the country who have paid DevCons in advance for certain works to be undertaken by councils. How are those projects being transferred forward, and the recognition of those funds? And for those councils who are funding depreciation with respect to those assets and have established and are building up reasonably significant renewal reserves, how were you going to audit that? So a lot of that was, okay, I need to give that some thought. So that's a work in progress, both for the audit sector, but also for the central local government special committee that are putting this whole thing together. So just sowing the seeds for that. But the other thing I just let you know is that the Canterbury LTP committee had its first meeting about 3 weeks ago, very well attended. All of the Canterbury councils were present, along with Office of the Auditor General and Audit New Zealand representatives. Around the table, all councils had the opportunity to speak to the progress they're making. And I have to say, as chair of that committee on behalf of the Canterbury CEs Forum, very, very pleased with the progress that everybody's making, the understanding of the workload that's required, albeit with that question mark over the what we don't know stuff. Also acknowledge that there are some proposed changes in the RMA sector. We will have seen the announcement, those a couple of days back, and the thing we don't know around COVID recovery and what exactly it is that we're recovering from, and what the post-election impact will be, what's going to happen when wage subsidies come off, economic impact, etc. So we're in a holding pattern in terms of those, and we'll keep that dialogue going with the audit sector. Final item, Mr. Chair, it's again a bit of a think piece, and you referred to a workshop, and we can either talk about this a wee bit here or think about it more in the workshop, but it's the content of our financial report. So about 3-4 years ago, we put in place the financial report template for each activity, where page divided into thirds. So the top third, of course, is the financials. Second third is the explanatory notes to that, or the exception notes. And the third one, a focus on key performance indicators or KPIs. They have served us well. During conversations, though, I think we've realised that it might be time to refresh those. Personally, I think we need to show greater focus on the KPIs, the non-financial drivers for our numbers, because from a financial management perspective, we're really strong, and there's no issues being raised by audit. But what do we understand about the drivers that are out there, and also do we need to condense a wee bit into an exception report only, and with that, consider what the role of this committee is in terms of the direction setting. That was the whole idea for reporting within a very tight monthly time frame, so that we can be a very, very proactive committee, particularly in the earlier stages of each financial year. So, interested to hear around the table the thoughts of everybody, treating activity reporting and CapEx reporting as two separate things. So my comments so far are around activity reporting, or OPEX reporting, if you like. CapEx is subject to a different regime altogether, and you'll recall from the discussion with myself and my KPIs last week that we talked about the need to review the CapEx thing, and that's a separate body of work. So happy to hear any thoughts. We'll start as for 10 for staff.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'm just thinking probably the workshop is the best place for us to attack that. If there's differing opinions here, I'm happy to hear that. But I think that it's very timely, and it's already showing the benefits of conversations we've had with our independent member around the frequency of reporting on all issues, whether we need to see those at every meeting or whether we can do a quarterly report on some items and change there. So that's a future discussion. I'll just quickly touch on a couple of things. I see there's a couple of questions there. I'll just quickly touch on a couple of things in the other reports, David. The comment around the conflicts of interest, I thought it was a particularly good document from the Auditor General. Particularly those examples were really quite useful, I felt, and they were very well thought through and covered a wide range of potential conflicts. Not all potentially applicable to us as elected members, but there were examples of that as well. So well worth a read, and possibly presentation and reminder to all of our committees of conflicts of interest and an understanding of that. Going through to the extension of statutory reporting timeframes, David, is that likely to have an impact for us? Just perhaps a quick comment.
Short answer is no, not at this stage, because of the engagement that we have got with our audit team, and also the issues that they found during the interim audit. You see, were fairly low levels.
And finally, the last is the about who is attending Orion, and we'll have the proxy for voting. I just had a conversation with the mayor who's going to be attending, and I'm quite happy if it is Sam who is the proxy. If this committee is happy for that to be the case, I will be in attendance as well, and I imagine others may be intending to go. So have I got a general agreement around the table for that? Yep. Thank you. And I'll go through the list there. Deborah, I believe you were first. Campbell Frank.
Thank you. Thanks, David, for your report. Two issues that you touched on and mentioned. One is the three waters. The other is the changes to the legislation being proposed to the Resource Management Act. And I'm conscious of the fact that we are going through our statutory responsibility of reviewing our district plan provisions. I'd just like to understand a little bit further if urban development and say biodiversity is separated out under the proposal that perhaps they're looking at. Where is that going to leave us as a functioning council or councils, including our regional council and our district council, with the functions that are going to be left if these are taken out, if those two functions are actually taken out and given to another statutory body to work independently of councils? Is there a risk there? What is the future? What is the big picture? What is the future going forward for local government, both at a regional and district level? And just looking at, I guess, with regards to the legislative changes, what is the cost impact to us at the stage we are at with regards to our district plan provisions? Just curious about an update on where to from here.
Yeah, sure. So look, let me respond to those, and I'll get Tim to fill in the gaps when it comes to the RMA stuff. Firstly, I just want to go back, the comment about conflict. The one piece of advice that I would give you all is, if in doubt, ask. And it is not uncommon. It's, for elected members, both of council and of the community board, to contact me on a regular basis for advice. So if in doubt, ask. Secondly, with respect to Three Waters, I'm going to defer my answer to that till this afternoon's workshop when all councillors are present, because all I'll be doing is repeating the comments. With respect to the RMA review, I guess the greatest risk at the moment is in the interpretation of the intent of what it is that central government are trying to do. It caught everybody on the hop. From an LGNZ perspective, I think they're still trying to unravel what it is that government have in mind. With respect to the impact, you've talked about cost. Yeah, there will be a cost, and the worst thing I could do right now is even attempt to put a number on the table and say what that might be, because we don't know. You asked, where is this going to leave councils functioning? Both TAs and regionals are asking the same question. You've also talked about biodiversity, and we know that central government are getting more involved in that. And also, let's not forget the other major announcement during the week, which was the climate change announcement, which has come out and not circulated to everybody. So all of those questions need to be answered, but at the moment, from a sector perspective, we just don't have those answers. We're still in interpretation stage. Tim, is there anything you want to add to those comments?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, a lot of unknowns, David. I guess there is direction of regionalisation and centralisation of the functions. That's fairly clear from the Randerson report. What I thought I might do, David, through you, is to perhaps provide a bit more of a thorough briefing at the next council briefing. I think it's the 2nd of September. But certainly significant changes, but a lot of unknowns, timeframes and costs. We are in the middle of a district plan review. I don't think we can do anything but continue with that review. We just have to keep going. I suspect the work will need to be done anyway. If there is a regional super plan, if you like to put it in that way, in the next 5 or 6 years, it's a bit unclear how that'll roll out, but it does appear that it'll be managed through a panel through the regional council. Costs probably will lie where they fall, but yeah, a lot of unknowns, and perhaps a bit more of a briefing on the 2nd of September.
Thanks, David. I guess one of the interesting things of note is the comment that came out with the RMA review was about the size of councils, and I don't imagine it takes a genius to work out that that means aggregation. So that may be a signal to smaller councils that their days are numbered, but who knows? We shall see. Further questions? Lisa.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Firstly, starting on the reporting and commentary around financials, I guess as the accountant around the table, when we talk about exceptions or reducing financial reporting, that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. So I think a good place to start will be almost a refresh of what the current reporting looks like, but starting with the committee's terms of reference. So rather than working backwards and going, you know, what do we need, what do we want to see, is that starting with that baseline document of the terms of reference, which is our obligations as a committee. And also asking, I guess, management to do this for us, is to take that terms of reference and then prepare an annual plan of what we as a committee need to see so that you can support us to meet our obligations. What that will do is make sure we are meeting our obligations under that terms of reference, but we'll also make sure we don't get scope creep, so that management aren't continuously giving us more and more information because we as a committee think that we need it. We always should go back to that terms of reference. So I know we've got a new GM coming in the next 4 to 6 weeks maybe, so it's probably quite timely as well, but just for it may be that we've actually got everything and we've got too much, but go back to that terms of reference, have a look at what we need to do to meet our obligations, and then develop an annual plan. And there may be some things that we need to see every meeting, but there may be some things actually that are lower risk that we only need to see quarterly. We actually don't need to see them every single meeting. So that would be my first commentary around that. And my second point is in relation to, it was sort of further in the reporting pack, but it's has come up under the conflicts of interest. I think I've mentioned before, I've got quite a big background in this area and a lot of fraud detection and unfortunately putting people behind bars that haven't actually followed these rules right to the very end. So conflicts of interest is a very strong term that, you know, is a question that gets asked, you know, do we have conflicts? And people straight away say, no, I don't have a conflict. And I think I've mentioned the Chief Executive and Mr. Chair that you get two extremes. You get people that go, oh, I don't have a conflict, that's not conflict, it's conflict. And then you'll get other people that declare everything. Oh, my second cousin removed is the plumber of, you know, you get both extremes. So it's better to be safe. It's better to be safe and sorry, but I think it's further in the pack, but it's around declaration of interests. So what I'd actually like to see in the committee, right almost under the minutes, is good practice, is actually us as committee members and probably the leadership team, is that you declare your interests. And they're there for every committee, for everyone to see. So rather than ask the question, are there any conflicts? Because people quickly go, no. It's, are there any changes to interests? And that can be, well, I've just been appointed on this board, or I've actually just taken another role here. And I know that will get covered off in that system. So it might be that once that system is up and running, we can just pull a report. So I had a few questions around that system, which I can cover off later when we get to that. But yeah, I'm more around declaration of interests, and then how are we managing those interests? So that's the important part, right? Because sometimes people declare an interest or declare conflict, and it gets parked away in a drawer and that's it, and it's not looked at again. So how are we actually managing that? Because most conflicts can be managed. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Annalisa. I think that's a very timely comment, and I'll get Chief Executive to make a comment shortly, but are you suggesting perhaps that we have on each agenda a list of our conflicts? No. Sorry, interest speakers. Sorry, I'm using the wrong term. Yeah, our register of interest on each agenda.
And as an example, that would be my name as independent member. I would be an employee of ABC, and I would be a director of Canterbury Cricket Network. So it's not time, doesn't take a lot of time, but it'll be, whether you're a director on any other entities, whether you're an employee of any entities, and you just update it for every committee. But then it's front and centre, and you're actually visually seeing it, rather than just asking the question, are there any conflicts? Because people very quickly go, no.
So adding to that, can I just point members to the paper on page 119 of today's agenda, and particularly the categories of interest at the bottom of page 121. So hopefully we've covered off most of those things. Timely comment about the terms of reference review. So we are scheduled to, we normally do that annually, but certainly we're in that time frame now that we need to pick that up. And I think when you talk about the workshop scenario, that's one of those things that we add on to that. The other thing I just want to say with respect to the reporting, I'm only talking about external reporting, so there'll be no change to internal reporting. That will still continue as it is at the moment with the same time frames.
Thanks, David. Nicole.
I was going to second what Annalisa was saying about the interest register. Now with ECAN and the zone committees and the court case with regards to forest and bird, it is now a regular agenda item that's on the thing as everyone's interest register. It's kind of weird to see that time there, but it is to be black and white of what people have got as a conflict. And also have to second what Murray had said about this, the report by the Auditor General, the Managing Conflicts of Interest, is very well written, and it's very easy to read, and it can be for anyone, even it doesn't have to be for public organisations to see. Now, I'm not sure whether you're just wanting anything on the financial reporting, what we were thinking. You're talking about a workshop, but my thinking, and I don't know how we'd go about this, that's why I just want to signal it as now, is the way we're sort of reporting with covering those 4 wellbeings, and I don't know how that would scope, but just as a heads up to maybe talk about in the workshop. I mean, these very things that are very difficult to do, financial reporting on, whether it sits outside that.
You're absolutely right. It's difficult in the financial sense, and that's where the non-financial drivers come in. And central government are very quick to say, hey, we reintroduce the 4 wellbeings. Well, the reality from a sector perspective is we never ever took them out. We always observed them. We've got a lot of activities driven towards responding to them. How we report, and that's the challenge in the LTP. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess for me, having seen these financial reports for quite some time, I'm very comfortable with them, very happy with them. It would be helpful to actually see some templates of the proposed changes to get your head around what's different. But I'd also note the information's not just used by the Audit and Risk Committee. The report comes to full council, and I know there are members of our community who are also accessing the council agenda and looking at those reports. So there's a wider group using these reports too. That's just, I'd like to note that noted that while it's a primary function of the Audit and Risk Committee to monitor that information, it's useful, it's still a responsibility of the whole of council, and there is a community interest in seeing that. And I think we're actually one of the more transparent councils by having had these reports monthly. It's actually kept us in the forefront in our community that has the ability to see how we're tracking on budgets and expenditure in I think that's great, and I'd hate to see us lose some of that in this process.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You're absolutely right. That transparency is key. What we will do, I imagine, is workshop that, and what that will be one of the considerations we'll take into account. And like any recommendation from this committee, it's subject to approval by the full council, of course. What I would hate to see is a dual process where we have one set of reports for audit and risk and one for full council. So that's part of the discussion we'll have at that workshop meeting. It may be that we don't get all information at all meetings, and that may be where we land. Well, I'm not going to preempt that discussion, but you're absolutely right. That transparency for us is key. It's key for us as councillors, but it's key for the community. So thank you very much. If there's no further discussion, I'll call for a mover and seconder for the acceptance of the Chief Executive's report. Moved. Nicole, we've got a seconder. Shane, all in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We move on to the cash flow and borrowing policy monitoring as of 30th of June. Craig, come forward. I guess you will speak to this, and you're at the table for the next three reports. So, welcome.
Is it better? Yeah. We're awake now.
You're inferring it wasn't going to be an engaging topic. Craig, yeah.
So I'll just give just a brief update of the Treasury position that is at the end of the financial year, 30th of June. So as with the last few reports, we still have 35.2 million in external borrowing. The average cost of borrowing is 3.46% compared to our budgeted borrowing percentage of 5%. So it's a little bit lower. It's just as a result of us taking out additional borrowing during the year at a much lower interest rate than we'd anticipated. We're currently preparing a cash flow forecast for the next financial year, so I haven't included in here any timing of borrowing or what we're going to be borrowing in the next financial year, but we're probably looking about doubling our borrowing just to fund our capital program, so another 30 to 35 million. And we are working with our Treasury advisors on the timing of this borrowing because obviously, like the market, the way it is, there's no real rush. They're advising there's no rush to borrow at the moment, so we're just waiting on their sort of go ahead to determine when we take it out for next borrowing. Also included in the report is the reaffirmation from Fitch that we have our AA+ credit rating. We talked about that at our previous meeting as well. On the term deposit front, we had $60 million worth of term deposits at the end of the financial year. We have noticed in the last few months, like the interest rate for borrowing, term deposit returns have also been falling. So rates are sort of looking at the lower 1 point percentages at the moment for term deposit investments. And our average investment at the moment gives us a 2.49% or 2.5% increase return on investment in term deposits. I'd like to point out that under the equity section on page 78, the investment value for Orion is sitting there at 87.5 million. That valuation is 3 years back when we completed our valuation on Orion. We've just recently received our valuation report from Deloitte, and the draft number is sitting at 106.5. So it's a wee bit of an increase. So we'll be a full report on that next meeting, I think. If we move on to the rates debtor section, there's probably something I want to draw attention to. So it's on page 84, discuss the reasons for that. So we'd actually reduced our rates debtors as a percentage of total rates down to 2.8% in the year 2017-18. Sort of several factors why it's going to kind of crept up. It's not just sort of COVID. So a couple of years ago, we changed the timing of our rates when they would fall due. They originally were at the 1st of June, so that shifted to the 15th of June, so 2 weeks later. So just shifting that out 2 weeks at the end of the financial year, we tend to have just a slightly higher rate, but debtor balance than we did previously. So that's a contributing factor. You remember that we've introduced the extension arrangement for ratepayers. So we've had about 40 ratepayers equating to about $50,000 worth of debt that's kind of just been extended out and given people timeframes to catch up on their debt. During the lockdown, we didn't sort of as actively chase rate debt, just for obvious reasons. So there's that sort of factor. And as I've talked before about the 2.8% in 2017-18, we also had a dedicated rate collection officer at that point in time, and now we don't. So that's sort of something we're working with the rates department to improve. So the actual collection of rates since year end is pretty much online with the previous financial year in terms of dollar value. We've had about $600,000 of rates collected. So like post, I think we're mistaken over it in the period ended June, it's actually July. Yeah, so we're actively monitoring that sort of situation, starting to chase up debt, but we don't see it as a major risk at this point in time. The real risk is sort of the cash flow of the rates collection, so it might just impact our cash flow collection, but at the end of the day, we have the ability to go after the mortgage and put limb notes on titles. So I'll be taking the questions on. Anything to report?
Bob, yeah, just a question on the mortgage and the limb notes. Have we got many people that we've got that far with, and is it a substantial sum of money?
I don't know that question off the top of my head. I've to find out, but I don't think it's a huge number. No.
It just might be pertinent to know that from this committee's perspective, just have an understanding, Craig. One of the concerns I've got, and you've voiced it about having a dedicated person chasing those rates arrears, is obviously we're moving into a sphere now in the economy where that there's likely to be more pressure. And I think if we, from a prudency point of view, it would be good for us to be active now before we reach what is almost inevitably going to be an increased situation. And I think if we're proactive, it's a better look for us to try and recover things now and not allow the problem to exacerbate itself. And it's going to put increased pressure if we're carrying that. Although we've got the ability to carry that, it does have a rating cost for the rest of the community. And I think if we're being open about the process, I think we need to have those discussions early and be upfront about it. So your comments.
So should have been clear. We have actually allocated a staff member to work full time, sort of on that process. So it's just during the actual COVID outbreak and we're in lockdown, we're sort of chasing people for debt at that point in time as much as we would have.
And it's about having conversations, I guess, with that person about, making sure that we are empathetic as well, and I'm sure staff will be. But it's about having those real conversations. We've talked around the governance table before about enabling people to make this as easy as possible for them in a difficult time. And I think that's absolutely the message that I would want to send from this committee, and I'm sure others agree. Yeah. Thank you, Annalisa.
Yeah, thank you. Great report. I think you sort of almost answered the question, but just a little bit more on the collectability of those rates and when you're doing your next year's cash flow. So what assumptions have you made around that collectability when you are developing the cash flow?
Yeah, it's something that we'll take into account when we're preparing the cash flow. There's not sort of an indication at this time that there's a big problem really in terms of like collectability or people falling behind. We'll just sort of something we have to actively monitor really to see what is actually happening out there. So yeah, it's kind of an unknown really.
And just secondly, and just more for my background, the Treasury policy, when that was developed around, I guess, tolerances and swaps and the level of risk that we're comfortable with, was that ever independently reviewed?
Yes, so that report is developed for us by PricewaterhouseCoopers. So they prepare it for several councils, and they're currently undertaking review
of the policy now for the long-term plan. So that will be at the September long-term plan workshop for councillors.
Great, thank you.
We also review that policy on an annual basis. So that comes to this committee, and Lisa, and we review that policy. Just a couple of things, if there's no other questions, and it's one I've asked before, Craig, is their ability in the marketplace to still borrow, and obviously our AA+ rating puts us in a good position. We still have good open lines of credit, no doubt, and it's just interesting to note, I guess this is just a comment really, the differential between what we can borrow at and what we can invest at. It'd be wonderful if we had the ability, we don't obviously, to borrow $1 billion and fund council without rates, but obviously that might step outside our cash flow and our policy. So really a comment, I guess, around the ability to have lines of credit open.
Yes, so we've been advised that there's no sort of risk of liquidity challenges for us. So we'd take out most of our borrowings, or all of our borrowings really, through the local government funding agency at the moment. And the government sort of backed by issuing bonds or taking their bonds to the LGFA. So there's like 30 billion they've issued. So there's no liquidity risk there. We also have a $10 million cash facility with Westpac, sort of immediate sort of cash flow requirements.
Thank you. If there's no, Deborah?
I just got one, and it's on page 83. We have one outstanding debt with regards to a resource consent. I take it that given the amount that would be covered by a 224 certificate security, or is it not? What's the story around that with regards to its collection?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that's normal practice, but I will give you specifics for that person subsequent to the meeting when I find out that detail.
Thank you. That being all, I'll call for a mover for the adoption of this report. Bob and Deborah, all in favour? Against? Carried. We move through to page 87, I think it is. Audit New Zealand Interim Management Report for the year just passed. Craig, comments on the report?
Yeah, so this is just the formal written report from the auditor, Gillian Tan. So Gillian came to the last audit and risk meeting and gave a verbal update on the report. It's just basically putting to the committee the written report from the auditor. So it addresses like the issues that they raised at the interim audit, and also just a update on the previous recommendations raised in the previous financial year. So sort of the key messages from that report are that the auditor considers that as a culture of honesty and ethical behaviour has been created in Selwyn District Council, and the auditor considers that the council's internal controls are designed effective and operationally effective, which gives assurance to the committee that basically the financial and non-financial information is correct, or yeah. And then I've also ran through the previous recommendations. I'd just like some feedback on the sensitive expenditure policy sort of draft inclusions, I guess. If anyone's got any comments on those, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Look, firstly, congratulations. That's a key statement that you made, that was made at the start, is that culture of honesty. And I think that's something we should celebrate. And it's been a conscious effort. I know conversations we've had in council with David around whistleblower policy, etc., and the fraud policy, and actually not just having a policy but workshopping that as staff and as elected members, and understanding that. And I think that gives a level of surety to our community that things are being done here. And I think we can't overemphasise that. I think we have to remain diligent, obviously, because fraud can occur even to the best organisations. But I think the framework here and the ethos of staff to see that implemented is to be congratulated. Sensitive expenditure policies, I'm sure there's some comments there from members. We got any comments anyone wants to make before I say something? Nicole?
Just wondering, so the sensitive expenditure policies that, so you're proposing these wording changes, have you passed those past the auditor? Or is it just for us first?
So these are based on the recommendations in the auditor's report. So basically update our policy to make the changes that they sort of recommend to align with best practice. So these are just sort of my wording suggestions. So just like any feedback from the committee, really. If there's anything that's incorrect or you'd like to add additional.
So we're referring to page 89, Craig, aren't we? Yeah. So the first one, I'll pick it up, discuss approval process for CE sensitive expenditure, mayor or chair of audit and risk. Eminently sensible. I think that's the level that's got to go to. Next one is just a word thing, isn't it? International travel. We acknowledge that, but I can't recall in 7 years anyone doing international travel on council. Meal expenses, that's always a bit subjective. You know, the cost of a meal in downtown Auckland is a whole lot different from it is in downtown Cromwell, but it's just what is appropriate at the time for the place. So again, happy with that. Alcohol expenses, personal stuff, and I think we know what our discipline is around that. I personally have a question over the use of alcohol as opposed to all refreshments. So if you're not drinking alcohol, does that mean you can drink as many bottles as you like of fizzy stuff? So I question that word, but interested in hearing the view of everybody else. Separate meal expenses, common sense wording, pre-approval for farewell and retirement expenses, and again, common sense approach that Craig's taken and does recognise the level of service, but also remember we have a budget that we operate from within, and precedent has been set in most of these cases, of course, as well. COHA policy, we observe a policy at the moment, and it's a policy based around goodwill, but it's one of those things that we will be discussing a wee bit further with the Runanga and taking advice from them and what they consider as best practice or accepted practice from an organisation such as ourselves, and that will of course depend on the event and the representation and the venue. Again, the proposed wording around the purpose, and it's not only the entertainment expenses during travel, but rather it's just the purpose of travel itself, more so for me, and that follows for the meal expenses, repetition of the word alcohol. I think it is sensible that events that plan to provide alcohol must be pre-approved by the CE. There needs to be an authority figure somewhere, and I think it's appropriate. It's myself. So, Craig, my personal view is I think you've done a really good job with that wording on those 2 pages.
Well, I'm not really sure on procedure because actually I'm not a member of the committee, so your indulgence. I guess it's maybe that might be addressed in terms of reference because it doesn't seem a point in having a subcommittee if every member of council speaks at it, so I guess that's something to work on. Just referencing, perhaps I'm only speaking because of a bit of history, sensitive expenditure is one of those things which comes up and really is a huge public interest, and we had it was all about perception. I know for instance that the mayor's expenditure signed off by the chair and the deputy chair, so just for the interest of public perception, I think you're better to have 2 people in that role rather than 1. And it's no reflection on the people in those positions, it's just about public perception that it is a 2-person sign-off.
I'm sort of glad you said that because that's why I was asking the question that I did. So
Yeah. So while I'm speaking, will I just carry on? I don't want to speak again. I'm sorry, but The other thing that came to mind, which is in the auditor's report, was around the IT people still being on the system. And I found this particularly galling because as a group, the Audit and Risk Committee had brought this issue to staff's attention before and been given categorical assurances that this was being fixed. So to have a representative sample of 20 and 35% of them still on the system indicates a systematic failure in my view, which hasn't been addressed. And so I think the auditor and probably us should be jumping up and down a bit and saying, well, actually, we told you this about a year ago and it's still there and it's actually worse. So not good enough.
Yeah, agreed, Grant. I was going to, if it hadn't been raised in previous comment from around the table, it was on my list to raise. I think you're absolutely right. Just quite conversation with the Chief Executive, definitely agrees that there should be 2 people signing off those expenses. So that will be a matter. I guess some clarity for the benefit of the meeting around just understanding of what can be claimed by those people would be, by those signing off. So just an understanding again of what is and isn't appropriate. And that's just a matter of looking through our register, David, isn't it? And working through that. So that's probably a good reminder to those of us who have the job of signing off to investigate that and make sure that we are signing off what we're supposed to be signing off, just to refresh. As far as work stream, David, perhaps we just get a report back on that, on where we're at with the IT, because it is a real concern. It was probably one of the sensitive expenditure aside, which I think we're dealing with. That was the major concern I think I had out of the entire report from the auditor, was the ability of ex-staff to still be contained in the system, and it is a real risk to us. But whether that's fraud or whether that's cyber risk, the ability to get in and sell information or whatever it happens to be. So it's definitely something we need to be over top of.
Yeah, I noted that with concern as well.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen the list of who put their hands up next, but Annalisa, yeah.
I completely agree. Great rewording. All looks fairly standard in my, professional opinion. I actually think one person authorising the chief executive's expenses is good practice, normal practice, as long as that person is independent. So I think it's appropriate that it's the chair or the mayor. Obviously, if it makes the committee more comfortable, it's 2, then that's fine. But 1 is normally fairly standard. The IT exceptions, again, a very quick fix that can just be remediated through an exit levers checklist, which I'm sure is probably in place anyway, just making sure that IT have signed that off, within a certain time frame. But no, I think, good rewrite and all looks fine to me.
Yeah, just thanks for that. Just following on from talking about the IT, so people are accessing the system, because I don't know, do they leave a footprint that can be tracked? Just wondering.
Yes. It's not my area of expertise.
No, I know.
I would say that yes, that would be the case. So I could ask our IT team to just run a report perhaps on staff that have left that still had access, just to see if there was anyone that accessed. I could do that. But it's basically been addressed in terms of what was happening was people were leaving, receiving their final pay through the payroll department, and that communication wasn't advised to IT that staff member had left. So you've got to leave it up to the last day until they leave. So someone needs system access, you say. So that's where it's kind of fallen over. So that's the way we've addressed that, is when the person is taken out of the payroll system, they paid their final pay, that communication. So at that point in time, so going forward, I'm pretty satisfied it's addressed.
Deborah.
Just a little bit of an extension from that with regards to IT. Given that staff members may leave, or councillors, for example, are not re-elected or retire from council, their laptops and cell phones, with regards to the information that may be on their laptops and cell phones that are handed back to council, do we have a policy or procedure or process for clearing those devices, so So information does not remain within those devices. Public excluded documents that haven't been released that are still in public excluded, as an example, from a councillor's perspective. What is the process, and do we need a policy?
So again, it's not my area of expertise, but I'd assume that is the case. I think the laptops and cell phones are completely erased and rebuilt before they're reissued to new staff, so they would be completely clear as far as I'm
The
aware.
short answer is, yeah, we do have a process, Deborah, that we go through. Yep.
Thank you. I just concur with the Chief Executive's comments with respect to alcohol. As someone who doesn't indulge, it did seem that I could have as many drinks as I like while the rest could only have one. That seemed generous. And in fact, the non-alcoholic drink these days can often be as expensive as an alcoholic drink. So the policy should probably be the slightly broader policy that the Chief Executive suggested. The other comment I was going to make, and I think we've kind of looked past it, was the 5 Waters improvement plan and the 5 Waters valuation. It's actually hugely important that we get the figures right for any potential aggregation of 3 Waters services. That may be that part of the valuation of the new super company, whether it's a CCO, whatever its form is based on the valuation of the assets that the contributing councils give. And we should be looking to set the standard of having ours properly valued, and also, as was mentioned earlier, possibly some pipe inspections to make sure that we're reflecting the current status correctly. So I think it's very timely that that's mentioned, because that valuation could become very critical.
Massively important because of the equity investment, not only in evaluation, but also in the way we treat any works mark over the next 2 to 3 years as well, and identifying the value of those works.
Yeah, Deborah, you've still got your mic on. I'm assuming. Yeah, thank you. If there's no more questions, the only thing I think is we need to make a decision around whether we have 1 or 2 signatories on the Chief Executive's expenses. We got an opinion around that? We'll go around the table, Deborah. Shane?
The only thing I'd add to that is just making sure that, because auditors love sensitive expenditure, right? It's the one thing they understand, and they go straight to it. They give it to the graduate, and don't minute this like this. But so make sure that it's practically possible. So if it is easy to have 2, then that's fine. But if we're going to end up breaching that because we've made it too difficult, we're going to be in more trouble than. So just make sure that if we do go to 2, then the 2 people that you allocate are actually in the build. You know, they're not only in the building once every quarter, and therefore we get done next year because we're not authorising them in a timely manner. But just think about that if you do want to push it to 2, that the 2 people are going to be.
So we currently have a system where
I guess pragmatic.
We currently have a system where the sign off for Sam's expenses are done via the chair and the deputy chair, and we've not had any issues with that in the past. So I think from a managerial perspective, it's very achievable. So yeah, Kieran, Shane, your comments? One or 2?
Sorry?
1 or 2?
1. I'm happy with it being 1.
Yep.
I think the wording of the policy will be the key thing today. So,
Yep, 1. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think one does it. If there's a need for everyone to feel like there's extra scrutiny over what's going on, then add another one. But the process has worked well till now, and the recommendation here is around 1.
Yep.
And it sounds like practice in other places from Annalise is 1. I guess the other question we need to ask is around the word alcohol that's in there, and both Mark and the C have brought it up. It does seem pretty narrow. And I'd also say that there's a number of times, and we've probably all experienced it when you're away, and actually some of the conversations that you end up having with other mayors, well, I know that I have with other mayors, and working for the Canterbury Mayoral Forum and at rural and provincial meetings, to think that you're going to have a sit down in an hour's meeting and over dinner, and that's the end of the conversation, to me seems a little bit limiting as well. So this is 1 beverage, and if I'm going to remove alcohol, I just think that limits actually the scope of what eating with others from neighbouring councils actually provides as a benefit back to us as a district.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, you make good points. I wonder whether we're going to go round in circles here today, and whether in the interim that we approve as is presented, and perhaps as forms part of our workshopping. David, is that a reasonable suggestion? All right. That being, I'm sorry, I won't carry on around the table. If that being the case, if we move the report as presented and add that to our workshop agenda, David, I think we'll get more rationality around it and some more information, perhaps what the criteria are as well, so we can have a proper debate about it, and then bring that through as a proposal. Nicole, you had a comment?
We're changing what we're moving.
No, I don't think we are. We're just making a commitment to go to discuss that in the workshop. So the recommendation stands, moved by Sam. We've got a second to Bob. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Move through to pages 119, I believe. Craig again. Electronic register of pecuniary and other specified interests of members. We've had some discussion already around that, and if you just want to give us a brief update as to how you arrived at what we've got and how that'll work in practice.
Yeah, so the existing sort of way that members or councillors can declare their interest is a paper copy or completing it on an online form and emailing it through. So we've just moved to sort of an online form that members can complete, and they can complete at any time. So if a new conflict arises at any point throughout the year, they can just jump on in there and just declare the new interest, and it will come through, and then it'll be compiled. And if what you were suggesting before is that you'd like it on the agenda at the start, we could do that just at the table, the current conflicts declared. That would probably be the best option. I'd just like to point out that it is actually the members or the councillors' responsibility to manage their own conflicts. This is sort of a aid that would help manage conflicts and compile them together, but at the end of the day it's up to the councillors to manage their own conflicts. Just want to make sure you're aware of that. So I'd just like some feedback really on the types of questions that I've included there. I've also got some feedback from someone already. I'd just like to add just one additional question in there to sort of extend the relationship with family members. So at the moment I had in there the question sort of more focused on family members who have sort of positions of power like directorships or key senior management positions in organisations, where I want to add an additional question. So the question proposed would be, do you know if any of your family members are employed with an entity that we do business with? So to sort of extend it further out into perception of conflict. There might not be a real influence there, but it's just be more transparent. So just like any feedback on any additional ones.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I just might kick off. It was sent through to Councillor Alexander from a functionary perspective as well. So, Mark, do you want to make some comments around that? You've had a look at it from an IT perspective, I guess. You've got some comments around that?
Functionally, no, I had no trouble. That I was the one that raised the question with broadening out the employment, because while, and I had a particular case in mind, my family member didn't have a senior management position in a company that does business with someone, it could be perceived that because he works there that I might have an interest in directing work there. So that I was the one that suggested the question be broadened, because while there is no influence, there may not be any influence, it's that general perception that there could be an influence that is important to us, and to be clear. But otherwise, no, I found that from an IT perspective, an online perspective, it worked well, and I think it's great that it's much easier to update and much less of an impingement, even on Craig's time, when if you update the register, you send it back to him and he's got to process it. If it's online and automatic, then that's a much better system. So no, I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Mark. And I think the comment from Craig also is that it's our responsibility to update that. It's very pertinent, rather than the email and then the reminder 2 weeks later, Craig, that I may have had in the past. it takes that onus away from you having to follow up with us. It puts the responsibility rightly back upon us. So that's good. Deborah, I think.
I just have one query around council appointees or appointments to various committees or maybe a board. Where does that stand? Is it best to actually put down that even though you're a council appointee, that you still have to register it?
It's, excuse me, through you, Mr. Chair, it's not a conflict, but it's just best practice to do that because it comes back to the perception again. And so might say, hey, but you're on that board. Well, if you have a look at the register, you're actually noted as being the council appointee to that board. You're not there in your own right. Yeah.
Annalisa.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions and very comprehensive and complete. My question is around, I guess, so going through the process. So great that everyone has to take their own responsibility of declaring their interests. But I guess my question is, does someone own this process? So is there someone in the legal team or someone that has oversight of actually reviewing the interests that are in place? And I guess the comment I made earlier too is that if, for example, I'm an employee of Selwyn District Council and my brother-in-law is one of the Calder Stewart brothers, so I've put that in the system, I've declared it. That next step of going the management plan to manage my interest is that I will have nothing to do with the procurement or tendering processes of anything to do with Calder Stewart, and then that is a one-up approval by someone that's got oversight on that, and then every quarter or year I then declare that I have had no involvement with procurement or tendering with Calder Stewart. So it's just that next step. So I'm just interested in understanding that this part's great, but just a little bit more understanding about how we manage an interest or a potential conflict.
So basically the process would be staff would declare their interest. The only staff member that has access to those declarations is myself. So I would go through, see where there's conflicts declared. I would suggest course of action, and then that would be provided to David or my general manager when they start, and then we'd come up with a process together. You're right that we don't actually have a process in place for sort of checking that there is no act, like that the staff member hasn't actually gone out and done something that they shouldn't have after they've declared an interest. That's something that we will probably look to introducing as well. That's quite a good suggestion.
I do find that when you make people do a positive affirmation, that works pretty well. When people have to actually sign, I have not, and they've actually got to sign it. You know, it's a pretty effective way. I mean, it's impossible for you to do that next step of confirming that hasn't happened. But if you can get people to positively confirm, then that's kind of good enough.
Yes, that's part of the online declaration. So you have your conflicts declared, and then there's 3 boxes that the staff member has to tick physically before they can submit their disclosure, and that's that they've read the policy, that they've been truthful in submitting their conflict of interest declaration. I can't remember the third one, but I think the third one's around notifying their manager if anything changes. The third one, so.
Oh, no, I was just going to compliment Craig for a very good common sense report.
Yeah, I guess we've looked at this through our own conflicts, you know, as members of the board here, but this is actually for the whole organisation. So the staff will be using this.
So this one is particularly for you guys. There's an existing one that's been in place for staff for maybe 3 years, which is very similar.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Craig. I think that's clarified things nicely. And like anything, it's a living document, a work in progress. And if we find that we need to add or subtract or change, we'll have the ability to do that when we review. But very good start, good work. So I'll call for mover of that report. Sam, seconded Deborah. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Craig. I think that's we'll let you off the hook for now. 3 reports, well done. Tim, page 1, 2, 3. You want to come? Yeah, please. Yep. Risk management. I guess Tim probably just speak to the and if there's any questions different than that, but just speak to the alterations and the changes and the reasoning. I guess would be the best way to attack this. Oh, we'll rely on your impeccable memory, Tim. Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Fairly short report. And I've included the entire risk register, and there's 3 sections to it: the operational, governance, and the COVID part of the risk register. Not a lot of changes since the last time it was here. Bit of a tidy up of a number of the descriptions, so referring to positions rather than staff, and a wee bit of reconciliation with some of the terminology in respect of the policy which is attached. There has been one addition to the risk register from a suggestion from a committee member around acts of terrorism, sabotage, and customer aggression. I don't know if I got that quite right in terms of the language, but I think it's a reasonable addition to, I think, the governance of the operational part of the risk register. So that's my recollection of what I've written here. I think that's pretty close, hopefully. So happy to take questions. I don't know what's going to say this.
I've got one query.
Yeah, sure.
Just with regards to the risk of staff from acts of aggression, you've scored that quite low, but I'm thinking of our enforcement officers that actually have to go out and deal with complaints within our community. I personally, realise that some of the situations that they could get themselves in could be quite contentious. And you've got the likelihood of occurrence as being rare and the score of 1. Have you considered or spoken to any of the enforcement officers with regards to how they would score that risk area?
Well, it's rare because it hasn't happened here a lot. So that's what I was basing it on, and yes, I have. I was looking back at the history in terms of enforcement action. I can't think of my time here where there's been actual act. There's been obviously a number of threats, but that actually hasn't, thank goodness, manifested in any sort of physical acts or of anything of that nature. But quite happy to take comments. As I say, it's relatively subjective when you come to looking at these things. I look back on the history and do talk to people, but if I've got it wrong, quite happy to make amendments. Interested in any other comments?
I just had a question around risk appetite. So great risk management framework that you've put in place, and then the register afterwards, which I think you got the inherent risk, and then the overall traffic light is the residual risk. So that's the risk after we think the controls in place. So I was just wondering whether the leadership team or the committee has ever had any sort of workshops around risk appetite and actually determining what level of risk we're comfortable with. Because I guess following on from Deborah's comment around this is a high risk, this is a extreme risk, but what level of risk are we as a committee or Sal and as a management team comfortable with for each category? So have we ever done any work around, because in the current future financial year that might be a good opportunity to get in you can get in an external facilitator to actually run a risk appetite workshop.
Yeah, that's a brilliant suggestion, because risk appetite is something we haven't workshopped. It's come down to me just looking at other risk registers and trying to gauge where that lies. But I suppose, and I agree, risk appetite is a big part of this whole framework. Yeah. And so I would welcome a workshop in the future
I
think it's
would,
an excellent idea.
I'd recommend that you do that as a leadership team first with an independent specialist and determine what you think the risk appetite is, and then maybe bring it to the committee to obviously then make commentary on whether they, and then ultimately it would be the committee endorsing it to then go to full council to approve the entity's risk appetite.
Not only is that an eminently good suggestion, Mr. Chair, but can I suggest we add that to the action list? For further follow-up there.
Yeah, thanks, David. You preempted exactly what I was going to say. I think so. You'll come back to us with a time frame for that. Yeah, a reporting time frame. And Lisa, did you have a further question?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Right. That being the case, I will have a mover for that report, which is going to be Shane and Sam. All in favour? Against? Carried. And we move to the final public, which is major projects, financial and contract performance report. Craig, just on your way up, noting that we've had an addition on previous reports as per suggestions, and yeah, be interested in your comments specifically around that addition of the risks, of the key risks that the contractors see from a health and safety perspective. Thanks, Craig.
Yes, good morning, everybody. The major projects report for June. If we turn to page 154, which is the indoor courts facility, this project is progressing very well. The only major comment I've got about it is that it's just in the build process. The structural componentry, including the roof, will be completed by the end of this month, with weather permitting. And the topic above that, the construction is due to be completed in March. We are cautiously optimistic that we'll actually finish that earlier. If it continues to, if the weather holds, and there's a whole lot of what ifs, but the project's going very well. As the chairman said, I've started to investigate information on health and safety to start putting in these reports, and it's while every contractor does have the information, it's in a variety of forms, and even within the same company, they have different formats. So I'm busy working with everybody just to get a basic sort of framework so that we can actually see it. And every one of them that I'm reporting on at the moment, it's all supported by individual items for each safety report. So it's quite good. The contractors are adhering to the health and safety rules. So if we look at, what are we on, 53, 54, 55, the Selwyn Aquatic, currently $7 million has been spent. The big contentious issues here are around maintenance and unexpected maintenance. The pool itself is going very well. We had some issues with pipe work and leaking pipe work, and at the moment there's a lot of discussion around whether it's actually a manufacturing problem, because Christchurch had exactly the same problem with the Metro pool. So that is, we're looking at that to recover our costs. But at the present time, instead of gluing the pipes, we've welded them, so we can have the whole place has now been backfilled, and we are not looking at having any further problems with it. The graphs on page 156 can cause some concern. The maintenance, they are producing a forecast that we are looking at probably a forecast of about 897. Now, a lot of this is to do with the fees that are being charged. Now, when you look back on how we actually came up with the budget of 691, that was budgets that were removed from the LTP, which were purely internal budgets. No one gave thought to what would happen when the project was going, and we've got project managers, external project managers, architects. Every man and his dog gets involved and wants to charge us for any work we do, or they do. So we are going to blow out on our maintenance budget, but this is still being monitored at the present time. I'm always reporting in a worst case scenario here, and staff are always working to actually mitigate any of these costs. The unexpected maintenance is purely that. It's now 80% complete, so we should not have it blowing out any further than what their projections are. The only thing about it is once we start pulling the reception area apart, we've got no idea what we're going to find when we pull that down. So a lot of these risks are quite high, and I prefer to keep them at a high level rather than keeping people informed, rather than turning around and saying it's all great and then my last report says no, we're well over. But the good thing about it is, as you can see from the graphs, the contingency budget, we're nowhere near living up to that. So we possibly will have some gains on that side to offset against the unexpected. So at this stage, I'm comfortable that the project's running. The actual pool, the new pool, is running to plan. It's just that maintenance side of things is we're getting a lot of stuff coming out of the woodwork. TRRT, it's really good to see that we've got a large building on the skyline now, and that's proving quite an interesting build. It's running a wee bit behind, but not, most of it was COVID driven. We are, at the present time, the flooring and the internal framing is all being installed, so it's progressing quite well. This is one of the ones where we've got a health and safety report, so we can see the incidents, and I'd like some feedback whether this gives you enough information or to show you that we're actually tracking it, because behind every one of these figures there is actually a report that I could provide if you're interested. But the work is on program, and the project team is progressing the procurement of fittings and furniture to make sure that we have availability, because some of that stuff is coming from overseas. So we've pulled that forward to make sure that it's available when we need it. The roading and infrastructure, interesting project. Tennyson Street is now open to two-way traffic. Virtually the only thing that we'll have left to any expenditure on that will be the defects, which is over a period of time, but we have retentions on that which will offset any costs. The car park 1 in the reserve we're picking the asphalting, is due for completion in August. We've been very lucky with the weather. It's been warm, the base course has dried out, and asphalting is progressing faster than what they had anticipated at the time, so I'm happy with that. Now the variations are quite extensive, and a lot of this is to do with the change in design, the change in the accepted contract when we decided to put it into separable portions, and we've discussed this in previous meetings. At the present time, out of 827,000, 774,000 has been approved. Now this is going to cause some problems with the overall cost of that particular part of the project, but we're working through that as well. And all these variations are approved by the engineer contract, who's an independent person, and so he believes these costs are genuine. The COVID claim, and Douglas might like to comment on this, while it's been submitted at 678, I believe at this stage we're about coming to an agreement of about a third of that. So I'm not sure. So, but we are working on it, and we're not approving anything. The risks of this project now are quite minimal because it's nearing completion, and I'm talking purely the construction side of it here, and most of the risk is in whether the weather will allow us to finish, and it's looking okay. Town Square is, or Town Centre, Town Square, that's just all fees at the present time, and most of this is part of the Armitage Williams contract, who are building the TRRT, so I've just split them out here. Town Centre that project is on hold, and yet we had a presentation from developers who can still remain positive about the project, and they presented a concept to council 2 weeks ago. The risks of that are quite evident, that if there's a downturn in confidence, business confidence, where we can get tenancies to fill the potential buildings. The developers anticipate this is a 5 to 7 year development time frame, so it's quite a long time, and I'm unsure of how we progress from here. Recovery Park, that's going very well. Utilities and drainage are largely completed. Sub-base areas and curbing are well advanced and due for completion late July, early August. And as of yesterday, asphalting did commence due to the fine weather. And we've also put in the foundations for the canopy, and the canopy will be built as soon as the asphalting team have got out of the way. So that's progressing very well. Tennyson Street, since I wrote this report, the lights were actually commissioned on the 30th of July. So once again, we have two-way traffic and no road cones and go stop men. The only other ones here are the Lincoln Reservoir. That's always been behind schedule, but we're now expecting that it will be the beginning of November or the end of October that project will be complete. Pine Solar Drying Hall. This is very much reliant on product coming out of Europe, and we did have, as of yesterday, they've confirmed shipping dates. So our technical equipment will be arriving by the 3rd of November, and the sludge mixer, a very large piece of equipment, will be here by the end of December. So we will be on track. At this stage, we're not looking like running over budget. So it will be completed within the 6.9 million, according to Jeff Schreier. The last one here is the Health Hub, and I must apologise, I transposed two numbers. Professional fees are not over budget. They are actually the construction costs, so we're under budget there. This is, if you look out the window, you can see we're actually on the second floor, pouring the second floor. We're putting up structural steel. Naylor Love is working very well on that, and we're slightly ahead of program. That's me.
Thanks, Craig. I just might preempt discussion a wee bit and say that the health and safety data will be a work in progress. And I think once we get a degree of information coming in, we may then come back to you and say, let's try and get some consistency around this with each of the contractors. But I think until we get a couple of meetings under our belt and get that information, I think present what you've got in the manner that you feel is correct, and then we might feed back to you and say, can we try and get some consistency? No, we're not looking at one reporting process for one contractor and one for another. How easy that'll be to implement with them. But I think it's a reasonable expectation from us that we have a set of data that's consistent across all contractors.
Yes, I set out a simple framework from which was supplied to me from one of the contractors. I thought it's either lost time injuries, injuries which didn't require any problems, incidents, near misses, those sort of things. So keeping it simple for a kickoff until we see what actually comes out of it, and to make sure they have the information to follow up with it. That's the key.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so my sort of background of major projects in health and safety, I'll be very keen to see health and safety for every project with lag and lead indicators. But I know it's no easy job. I know when you're the principal, but you've outsourced the contract, then getting multiple contractors to report, as one consistent framework it's not a couple of meetings. It'll be a 6-month, maybe 12-month project to actually get some really good health and safety. Because actually, to do it properly, you need to do it in pre-contract. you know, so it's quite hard when you're midway through a contract to then go to the contractor and say, oh, can you give me some health and safety reporting on lead and lag indicators? This is how I want you to do it. Yeah, they're all doing it anyway for other jobs, but yeah, there's a big effort. And the easiest way to get it right is to get it right in pre-contract. So, but that's a great path that we can start going down. My second question was around the term maintenance and whether that is linked to risks and the financial impact of risk. And that leading on from that was, is that different to contingencies and variations? So is a contingency number linked to risk, i.e. do we understand the price of the risk if it was to eventuate?
With the contingency, I have kept that separate for the construction phase of the new pool, because there was actually two sources of budget that came that makes up this project. The 691 was deemed to be taking some budget, long-term plan budget lines and concatenating them all up, bringing them all forward and saying that is our budget. So we've actually got the dollar value of what we expected to spend on maintenance over the next 5 years. In fact, some of it was only 2 years, which I sat down with James, the pool manager, and went through his budget lines to see how the 691 was made up. We came to within $1,000 of it. So I'm quite happy that there is a dollar value assigned to the maintenance. Where it comes unstuck is where maintenance is just required, which we didn't expect. We do try and associate the cost of each component to the risk that that's there.
Oh, right. So the risk of redesign or anything, I guess, that comes up within the project that's unexpected, that's been recognised as a risk that then has been quantified as a dollar value?
Yes, when I was analysing out what the risk was and why we're actually going to be over, it does boil down to that within the risk, within the budget profile, there is no allowance for doing design. So we actually took a figure which was in the LTP and said, oh, that's what it'll be. But it doesn't actually work like that in practice when you're coming to actually having external design people, external project managers. Their costs will go up, and that wasn't thought of at that stage. So it's a high risk of that maintenance budget being overrun.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I think, I'm not sure if you covered it there, but the opportunity in the build was to bring forward that maintenance as well. So it was a timing issue as well. So it also contributed to us not having the same degree of loss of income while we had the pool closed. So it was a timing thing. I think I'm right in saying that we took the opportunity to do some of that maintenance at a time when the pool, to minimise that revenue impact. Douglas will speak to that far better than I can. Yeah.
If I just bring you back to page 155. So there's a couple of issues here. So what Craig's been explaining there is the contingency and unless the questions on contingency of 622. So that's what you would call our construction contingency. And that is the item that is going extremely well at the moment. We're basically out of the ground. I've seen work on columns this morning. With pools, as you can appreciate, often the difficult bit is in the ground. The other thing we de-risked ourselves was by using the Natir pool option, which is a prefabricated pool, which is just a much simpler construction side. The issue that Craig's been raising here regarding maintenance. So there was a report provided to Council on the 26th of February 2020, which we just now need to bring into this table as well, because was going to be something as part of March's reporting, but COVID sort of gazumped us a wee bit. There's two items of maintenance we reported on there, the 691, which Craig's explained, and another figure of 785, which is spelt out. That 785, we flagged in our staff report that the aquatic rate will have to lift by about $5 per property per annum from 1 July 2021 to meet the items that we had there. So we'll provide that increased reporting so that that's a bit of a reminder of what we've done there and reporting to you previously. The other one I just want to update you on is if you move to page 156, and this is timing here. So one of the pieces of work being done by our property staff, Aquatic Centre staff, and also Armitage Williams is we're now looking like our project milestone with rejigging things a wee bit will be more in that May, June 2021 period. The refurbishment of what you call the main pool will probably still be in August completion, but that's shortened up the period of the construction. It also can be done without any significant impact on how we operate the pool from an income perspective, which helps. It also helps us with any contract supervision costs that, as Craig said, can potentially run away on you as well. So there's a few things we're able to shorten up there, and we'll force them to you on September about how that will work. I just want to also endorse the comment made before that each contract has a different way of reporting on their health and safety. So one of the wee challenges of trying to put a consistent template in is that we can pull from their data easily and not make it a challenging process for us all. The data you want is well worth it. It's just we just need to make sure we can get it without too much more hassle.
Mark.
Thank you. Question I had, and it's just so I understand it, and it's so anybody in the community who reads this report, was on Lowe's Henderson Street intersection upgrade. The comment around the 11 kV cable not being completed design, and what, if any, impact that has now the lights are operational. I don't know that you'll have the detail now, Craig, but if we could be informed as to what that actually means in the context of the lights, it would appear to be finished and operational, because the community is always very disappointed when we finish a project and almost immediately thereafter somebody's back in the roadway digging it up again. It's not a great look. So if we can get that feedback, whether it's in a month's time or whenever, just so we understand what that actually means.
Information this morning was that that work will be completed this week. So we're expecting that project is done and dusted.
Grant.
Just around the unexpected maintenance, I realise it's a corrosive environment in the pool sitting, but does it suggest we have a wider problem with our asset management program, that we might have further instances of unexpected maintenance in our stock of buildings and assets that we're not aware of? Is our asset management program aware and had a bit of a look at and said, actually, we might have a bigger problem here than what we think? So just the question raised and put it to the chair.
And I think through you, Mr. Chair, that's probably again best addressed on our action list. Obviously, we can't answer that question today, but we can. That'd be my recommendation.
So from that perspective, that's good. It's a good point raised by Councillor Miller. What time frame do you expect to be able to give us a report on that, David? Do you want to put that on?
Can I help you out there? So we're currently doing condition assessments for all our buildings as part of the long-term plan process for 21-31. So that work is underway as part of normal planning. So it will come to you over the next 4 to 5 months as you're putting our long-term plan together.
If we were to say October, November, Douglas, is that if
it's all? Yeah, it's all part of the long-term plan program.
Yeah. Okay. No further questions. I'll ask someone to move for the adoption of that report. Nicole and Bob, all in favour? Against? Carried. That moves us to the end of this meeting. I'll ask us to move into PX. Deborah?
Just before you move into PX, there is one issue that I brought up under debt recovery that our Chief Executive was going to talk to. There's another issue too that has come to my attention reading through our risk register with regards to statutory compliance. There was mention on page 139, an issue around a sale of a property. I'd like to have an explanation in PX around our risk with regards to the sale of the property that was actually mentioned. And I think it's best that it is dealt with in PX as an issue. So I just want to highlight that before we go into PX, because that's the proper place to actually raise it.
Thanks, Deborah. It'll give David some time to have a conversation with you and understand what the question is as well, because it's not immediately obvious to us, but you'll understand what you're asking. I'll ask for someone to move us into PX, and then we'll have a break before we resume. Nicole and Sam, all in favour? Against? Carried. Quick cup of tea, and we will resume. David,